Greetings, friends, and welcome back to the Win In podcast. I'm your host, Max P., and today I have another guest with me, the infamous, the Azorius Mad Mage, Naestrome, better known as Jason, the Tameshi guy. What's going on, Jason? How you doing?
Doing all right. Recovering from the Invitational and all of the punts and things that come along with it, but doing pretty well. Excited to be back and excited to start playing other things besides Tameshi and CEDH now that we're done with the Invitational for the year.
Ooh, that's interesting. I'm surprised to hear that. Yeah, that's really cool. I want to hear what that's all about. But neither of us did great, unfortunately. We had some chances. I think both of us had some chances, had some pretty epic punts. You did a little bit better than me. I only got one win and one draw through 7 rounds. It was a slog fest. First of all, I want to say, it was an honor to be there.
Yeah. Totally.
At all. It was an honor to be there. It was exciting to be among, the best players in the world, really. Mm-hmm. And compete full bore against them as best I could. It was a special weekend that I really enjoyed, even if I didn't do that well.
Yeah, 100%. And I think my experience with the weekend, the end result was not what I wanted. One of that due to a punt and a win and end situation where I had the game locked up. But overall, I'm proud of the performance that I had, and all of the games were very close and competitive. And there were a few things, some within my control, some without, that led to me not making top 16. I had 3 separate games where I had the win and was presenting it. One of which I just completely punted, and it's entirely my fault, and we'll get into that. One where there was an awkward situation with getting close to time in round, and it was considered a draw 5 seconds before I was going to untap and go to my turn. But that was with the judge watching the whole time, and it was all above board and totally fine. And so that was a little frustrating. And then in the last round, we're all in a win-and-in situation. I'm untapping to my upkeep on what will be the last turn, and they decide to cast a silence to effectively give all of us a draw and knock all of us out of top 16, instead of giving me a shot at trying to present a win and letting one person in the pod move through. So a lot of really tough situations where the speed of Tameshi, I think, slowed it down a little bit. But really solid play all weekend. I got what I was hoping for, and that was Tameshi performed at a level where it made top 16. I didn't. And so that's sort of been the mantra for me this weekend is I accomplished what I wanted to in a year of playing Tameshi, and that is proving that it can compete at the highest level. And speaking of the highest level, I don't know about you, but a lot of the play this weekend was incredibly tight, and this is what I was hoping would happen with all these amazing pilots this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my experience was, well, first of all, I spent months teching for this tournament. I kind of tried to throw people off a little bit. I tweeted about not knowing exactly what deck I was going to play, but I've known for months. You and I have been talking about it and working on it for months now, so there was never any doubt of what I was going to play. But I spent all that time teching for what I expected. I expected a lot of RogSi. I expected things to be very, very fast, and I was trying to come up with good ways to slow things down a little bit and then break open windows against BlueFarm and all this other stuff. And then when I got there, the meta was not what I expected, I think mostly because everyone else was doing what I was doing. So I ran into all of the tech that I was teching, and it slowed me down and stopped me a lot of the time as well. So rather than me playing very, very fast into these pods, I really had to work around a lot of stacks effects that I just did not expect to run into. I also lost early, so losing the first couple of games jettisoned me into the group that was losing. And they were all running stacks pieces and slow game plans, and just was not very good for me. I made some epic punts, really, truly epic punts in 2 games. The first one, and it's I literally wrote down at home before I left for the tournament. I said, if Nadu plays an enabler, you stop everything you're doing, you play Jessica, and you kill that enabler. And then I had the opportunity to do that, and I didn't do it. I played Timna instead, and I lost because of it. Take your own advice, guys. And then the other one was I had the opportunity to force what would have been a draw, and instead I had literally cast a silence into a deafening silence to try to win, forgetting that it was there. Just boneheaded, just mistakes. Yep. So it is what it is.
Speaking of boneheaded mistakes, those who were at the event got to see it, but I punted a win and in on camera in round 6 with my entire deck in my hand minus 3 cards. And I know it was 3 cards that weren't in my hand because those were the 3 cards that were milled to a grinding station with a Tameshi draw trigger on the stack. And I had 15 different ways in my hand to deal with it, and I just completely forgot the grinding station was there. I think being on camera and having the win ready to go and it being my win in a top 16 of the highest stakes event for CEDH of the year, I was moving too quickly. And everybody in the pod was really gracious afterwards. Eric, Matt, and Sharky ran up and gave me a hug after he won afterwards, just to apologize for like being in that situation and losing in that big of a straight. And I have memorialized it since. Everybody has their token of their remembrance. You have your Mox Opal with your Mind Break Trap situation. I now have, thank you to Gold Sabertooth for doing this, especially as he's packing up, getting ready to go, my grinding station token that says slow down. And this will now be my first game action that I take when I'm presenting a win that I think we'll get through, is this is going to come out of the deck box and go onto the table, and I'm going to take my time executing the combo. I will not make that mistake again. I wish that I made that mistake in a situation that was less stakes, but this is a lesson for everybody that grinds tournaments. It does not matter how much you play, how confident you are in your deck, and how solid your play and technical skill is. You are not infallible as a player. There will be times where you will punt on stream, you'll punt in smaller games afterwards, and it'll stick with you, and it's a lesson for it. And we saw that this weekend. The best players made play mistakes, and when you get into it, a format as complicated as CEDH can be, even Sam Black, somebody who's been on the Pro Tour, wrote that he made a mistake in one of his rounds where he mental misstepped to Swan Song, knowing that the next player was going to untap and win, instead of trying to have a conversation with the player about letting their spell get countered and saving both pieces of interaction that were there.
Yes.
It's very complex.
And the thing is, the higher the level of play gets, and I'll tell you this, I don't know about you, but every round felt like a top 16 or top 4 game. It was just that level of skill and intensity. And when you're at that level, every little mistake, every little misplay is amplified, because no one's going to miss it. No one's going to miss, like, if you're in a Swiss round in a regular tournament, like, you might get away with it because you might be able to recover from your mistake, or people won't notice the opening that you've created. In this tournament, that didn't happen. If you left an opening, it was taken.
Absolutely. I think the big kind of reason that happens is how information gets controlled at this level. Everybody knows what everybody else's deck does for the most part. And if somebody accidentally reveals some information about being light on interaction or having the win on the next turn, that's getting taken by all 3 other players to the table and factored in. And you're not going to get away with accidentally revealing you don't have anything. Like, somebody's going to see that and push a window. That came up a ton. We had my round 1, the one that I did end up winning. The only reason we got there is because Jason, person who runs EDH Top 16, went for a win line and cast a gamble with 15 cards in hand, and they got the really unfortunate situation of discarding their Chain of Vapor to get rid of the Draneth that they tutored for. Those sorts of situations can come up in other games, but at this level, like, those are things that are deciding games. Is sometimes it comes down to the variance because the play is so tight. Yep, absolutely. I don't feel bad about the tournament, even though I had my mistakes. It was a great experience, and it gives me something to look forward to next time. I've successfully grinded all this year. I've made top 16s over and over and over again, but I haven't converted nearly enough of them for my taste, and I think that cost me too, and that I didn't have enough experience at that level, and I think that cost me as well. So I really am making it a goal for myself. Like, I really need to consistently break through to those top 4s and get more of those kind of games under my belt, which I think would help me getting into the NV and succeeding in it next year. Yeah,
so
I'm feeling the same. I think I set a challenge for myself to play Tameshi in tournaments exclusively. I play other things outside of tournament settings, but in tournaments, it was just Tameshi this entire TopDeck season, and truly for a year and a half. And I'm now, at this point, kind of telling people, like, I'm free. I can play other things in tournaments. And so I've got a list of different decks that I've been playing outside of events and things I'm ready to take to new ones. But I think that's going to be a challenge for me as well, is playing a deck that may inherently be more powerful, have a more streamlined strategy to win the game early. I think is going to help translate, especially in Swiss rounds at these events, where a game that I would draw in a Swiss round that was a winning position for me that I didn't get a chance to continue to develop in other archetypes will be a winning game because the strategy is different. And so I'm excited to see that and see how that ends up converting. And I'm also hoping to have a little bit more success with that in other archetypes that play better to the clock.
Any hints at what you're looking at?
So I play a lot of RogSi. I play a lot of RogSi outside of tournament settings. It is so hard to stop casting Flare of Duplication. That is a card that, oh man, once you have the joy of an outplay with a Flare of Duplication, you really don't want to do much else. But the most The deck I'm going to play soonest is actually something I've been working on since the Invitational. It was a very recent deck. It is Francisco Thrasios.
Interesting.
It is
Interesting.
Some really cool lines in it. And some of the big pieces, people have been talking about Valley Flood Color and Retraction Helix and that way to make infinite mana and ways to convert it. Francisco's a bird. So you can, all at instant speed, flash in Valley Flood Color, and even though it's summoning sick, target Francisco with the Retraction Helix and make infinite mana to dump into Thrasios.
Ooh. That's really
so you
cool.
Get a lot of different lines. There's a lot more instant speed play to it. You get some really cool small synergies, like Delighted Halfling being able to cast Necro Dominance because it's legendary. So you have an uncounterable Necro effect, which can be very hard to interact with. Lots of different testing I'm doing with it right now. Kaiser up in the Northeast is helping me brew this a little bit. He had some ideas for it, so we're working together a little bit on it, but I'm looking forward to playing something a little bit faster, but still has some good flexibility to it.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I played Tim the Jessica at the Invitational. I felt really good about the deck, minus a couple of small pieces that I think, like I said, I teched wrong for. I think the deck is extremely strong right now, and I have no intention of stopping playing it right now. But I don't feel like, I think differently from you. I did manage to play 3 different decks throughout the course of the season and put up results with all 3 of them. So I feel like I already felt kind of free. So I feel like I, at least for now, want to double down on Tim the Jessica and see where I can take it.
Totally. And I'm excited to continue playing Tameshi. I'm going to be playing tournaments with it pretty regularly. It won't be every single tournament. I think, and this is the thing I'm most proud of, is the deck list going into the Invitational felt pretty perfect. There might have been 1 or 2 slots that I would want to change out and make slightly different. But that is as a deck, I think this weekend I was able to prove that it competes.
Definitely.
And it's still something I want to offer coaching on and will be playing and keep foiled out. Like, it is my pride and joy of a deck. And I think it will only continue to get better.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's take a look at like how the meta actually shook out at the Invitational. You weren't on. It was Ashani, the Jamaican dude, last week who helped me break down the preview of what I was expecting to see. And I'll put this up on the screen. I'll just show these 2 charts right now. I was really close. I was really, really close to accurately predicting everything. You know, I had the BlueFarm share being at 25%. It dropped ever so slightly down to 24%. I had Sisse at 16% and nailed it. It was exactly 16%. RogSi, however, increased, picked up an extra 5% and went from, my prediction was 12%, went all the way up to 17%. And that was really because there were a handful of people who I had expected to be on completely different decks. Like, for example, there was Austin, who I had predicted would be on Paco and Halden, ended up being on BlueFarm. I had a few other people who ended up going with RogSi, who I predicted. Let's see, I know
Larry was going to be on Najila, and he decided to go to RogSi for the event.
Yep, and Uriah, who I wasn't sure if he'd be on RogSi, BlueFarm, or Stella Lee, ended up on RogSi. You know, there's Tevish Krom for Eric. You know, usually that's Sharky's baby. He went with RogSi. So that was a little bit of a surprise. Not a huge surprise, but a little bit of a surprise. And then the biggest surprise to me in terms of the meta breakdown was Comedian and Just Ice both decided to bring Kinnan, which I did not expect to see at all.
I was under the impression, even the morning of, that Ian was going to be playing Sisse.
Yeah, same.
And it wasn't until later in the event that I found out it was Kinnan.
Yep, and he did it. I mean, he made a tremendous comeback. He started off the first day exactly the same way I did. He went, I believe, 1-4 on day 1. He went 1-4, and he started 0-4, and came all the way back to make it to the top 4, which is pretty crazy.
Ended up winning 4 games in a row. It's pretty remarkable. But I mean, we've seen the track record that he has in these events. When he misses, it's not by much, and so seeing that he ended up making that comeback, I'm not super surprised. Ian's been an incredible pilot on whatever he plays.
Yep, absolutely. So, you know, I was close. It wasn't perfect, but I was close. And
I mean, this is a breakdown where this is a very good representation of the meta. Seeing the percentages we have for BlueFarm, Sisse, RogSi, I think those are, and have been for quite some time, the 3 big decks of the format. We've seen Kinnan come in and out. We've seen Najila come in and out. But I think we've hit this stable point, especially since, I would say, Lord of the Rings and Modern Horizons 3. Those have really kind of cemented those strategies as being the top 3. We still see some other things. I know that there's a couple of Tivits finding their way onto the list. We've got some number of Kenrith that showed up in
4 Kenriths, yeah.
But I think this is sort of how we'll see the meta shift over time, is we'll see more concentration onto these meta decks. And who knows, we might see format shakeups in the future with new set releases and potential changes to ban lists, whether things get banned or unbanned. But I think this is going to be what you should expect at a lot of your events moving forward.
You know what's interesting is looking at the Open. If you look at the breakdown from the Open, the share drops significantly. It ends up being much, much more diverse in the Open than it was in the Invitational, believe it or not. So whereas you saw that almost 25% share for BlueFarm in the Invitational, in the Open, that drops all the way down to 11%, which I was really surprised by. I didn't expect to see it quite that low. And then you had a total of 33 BlueFarm decks. We had 22 RogSi in the Open. So that's 8% of the meta. And then Sisse, and then Nadu was much more present, I think, in the Open than it was in the Invitational, which is probably a sign of things to come. I think, you're going to see a lot of these Nadu pilots also included in the Invitational next year, assuming that Nadu doesn't get banned, of course. So the conversation going on right now is like, is CEDH healthy right now? Is there enough diversity? Are there too many draws? All of these questions, they're all swirling around right now. And looking at the Open, at least, I think the answer is things look pretty healthy from where I stand.
Yeah, I would agree. I think Nadu is a deck that I think we'll see more of, and I think it creates some play patterns that aren't great for tournament CEDH. I think the deck is probably better than people are giving it credit for. I think it may crack that top 3 at some point. But it's got some real power to it. I think the disadvantage is when you have 3 other players at the table who know how the deck functions and what it's doing. It's very easy to put Nadu in a position where it can't win the game because its win is face up on the table. You get to see Nadu, you get to see Shuko. You get to see all the cards that go into their hand. People really dislike losing to known information and seeing if they had a way to combat that. The challenge is being the player at the table who stops Nadu from winning and also wins the game.
Yes.
That typically is not the same person.
Yes. It's the Winota problem. It's really what it is. Like, you run into those situations where you have a tutor and you want to use that tutor to win the game. And instead you have to use the tutor to keep Nadu under control. And the whole table expects you to do it. And it comes at the cost of maybe you having any chance. And that's a difficult spot to be in. It's a difficult thing to navigate. And we'll see how things go moving forward. I think we'll find better ways to navigate that. But for right now, it's kind of the Wild West. We're still learning. We don't know what to do yet.
And we'll have more sets released. And I think this is something we've seen every time a new set comes out, is something comes in and shakes things up. We had Bloomburrow come out, and we just got Valley Floodcaller. That has made things really complicated. We had Modern Horizons 3 bring Nadu and the Flares. Flare of Duplication has really put RogSi up into that conversation of being potentially the best deck in the format. There's some argument that BlueFarm, even though it did take down the Invitational, is the strongest archetype. I think there's still some room to talk about that. I think we'll see RogSi numbers pick up, especially after the Invitational, and seeing how many players have been trying to swap over to that strategy. And I'm excited to see what happens at the Boil too. I think that's going to be the real test to see what happens to CEDH and what the tournament scene looks like. And I'm pretty sure we'll see a pretty big level up from everybody, whether they were in the Invitational or in the Open.
Yeah, agree. And there were some killers in the Open for sure. But the other change, the other interesting thing that happened at this tournament was it was a change in rules enforcement level. Over the last 2 years, or however long it's been, consistently the rules enforcement level has been comp REL, competitive REL, and somewhat loose comp REL in some tournaments, some more than others. But that's been the standard. And at this tournament, at the Invitational, it was pro level REL, which was a bit of an adjustment for everybody. I don't know, a little tiny bit of criticism for TopDeck is I wish they had announced this more widely leading up to the event, so it wasn't you learned this as you were there. But I think it's a great development. I think it's good for all of us. It definitely ups the level of play, but it did cause a few controversies that we should probably talk about.
Yeah, there were 3 primary ones that I'm aware of. And for those that aren't aware, professional REL ups the stakes a little bit of doing things that are not within the rules of the game of Magic. This doesn't necessarily mean that they're more strict on cheating specifically. While that is true, they are significantly more on top of rules violations, anything like that. So if you are going to draw for your turn and you accidentally draw 2 cards, the cards stick together and you see both of them, you'll get a warning for that. And at professional REL, and a judge can correct me if I'm wrong with this, if you get 2 warnings in the same day, that can often lead to a penalty like a game loss, which in CEDH is a match loss. And if there is a potential advantage to be gained from from the nature of both of those warnings, and it's kind of not necessarily clear if it was a genuine mistake or what it may look like, that can lead to a disqualification, which happened in 2 of the 3 disqualifications this weekend. We had one player in round 1 of the event. There's miscommunication about somebody with a Necropotence in play saying pass when they meant to pass priority on something, and it was interpreted that they passed the turn. So the next player untaps their permanence, draws a card. Table clarifies, hey, no, he's not done yet. Takes a card from his hand, puts it back on top of his deck. There's a conversation had about how to resolve it. And before a judge was called, the deck was being shuffled back up. And that's just not something you can do. So that player was disqualified promptly. That doesn't necessarily mean that player was directly cheating and there's something nefarious happening. However, at professional REL, they're not going to take that chance. It's going to be assumed for the integrity of the event and for the sake of all of the other players there that are attempting to play by the rules as efficiently as possible, then they're going to deliver out a pretty harsh punishment for that.
Which I fully support. I mean, I think this is absolutely the way to handle it. You know, going forward, it's going to be much harder for actual cheaters to get away with it if this is the level of enforcement. So I applaud this completely. I think it's exactly the way to go. Yeah. Did you get any GRVs, by the way?
I got a single GRV that I called on myself in round 7. I cast a Vexing Bauble with 7 cards in hand, and there was a pretty large political conversation happening about whether or not to counter it. Specifically, it was me, there were 2 other players, and then the player last in turn order was debating countering the spell. And I said, hey, let's not do this. This is going to be a waste of interaction. This player has tutored the previous turn. I really think this is not the greatest idea. We come to an agreement. They let the Vexing Bauble resolve, and I pass the turn after this lengthy conversation. Player 2, right after me, gets into their main phase. They start casting spells, and then I realize I didn't discard to hand size the last turn because we got too wrapped up in the conversation. So I called the judge, said, hey, I have 8. I didn't discard to hand size. I had 8 cards when I passed the turn. I've drawn 2 cards off of this Mystic Remora. How should we resolve this to make sure that I can discard down to the appropriate number of cards? Judge made the ruling of the cards that I had at that point in time, I discard down to the number of cards in hand that I would have had it during my end step. So at the point that I called the judge, I had a total of 10 cards in my hand, the 8 from when I passed my turn, and the 2 that I drew off the fish. So the ruling was I discard 1 card to go down to what would have been 7 before I passed the turn. Now, advantage to me, I had drawn 2 cards during that player's turn, so I technically had 2 more cards to decide what to discard. I don't want any advantage. I already play a weird deck. People are already a little bit wary of me taking game actions, and with good reason, having success with a strange deck does that. So I showed the tables, like, here's the 2 cards I drew. You can believe me or not believe me, it's fine. Showed them a Mana Vault and an Idyllic Tutor. Discarded a card to hand size. Really wish I could have discarded that Idyllic Tutor that I really didn't want to have in my hand. But that was the only one. Players were really great about it. It was a very clear ruling, but that's the only GRV that I did.
I got one because I had cracked a Dothy that was under my control to cast a Lightning Bolt that was in the Dothy Exile Zone. And it ended up being copied by a Wandering Archaic. And during the resolution of all this, I forgot to reach across the table, grab the Lightning Bolt, move it from exile to the graveyard. And the judge was watching as this happened. The spell's resolved, and then we went to do the next game action. He's like, stop. You know, GRV, you didn't move, the Lightning Bolt to the proper zone. So both myself and the person whose Lightning Bolt it was both got GRVs for that. So very tight enforcement, which I completely am good with. I think it's great.
I'm all for it. It makes you a better player, and there's going to be some instances where there are some consequences. I know our second disqualification that happened was one where lots of moving pieces. CEDH is a very complicated game. Things did not get resolved in the game state, didn't get maintained the way that it should have. I think there was an Orcish Bowmaster that triggered once, and 1 damage was assigned. The player who controlled the Grand Abolisher thought that it had died, so they moved it to the graveyard. There were some discrepancies about how many cards were drawn and how many pings were delivered, and how that ended up working out. The player who controlled the Orcish Bowmasters was ultimately found to have been disqualified for allowing the Grand Abolisher to die from the Orcish Bowmaster that didn't trigger enough to kill it.
Right. My understanding is he was it was his responsibility, since he demonstrated knowledge of the number of pings to notify the Grand Abolisher player that he put the Abolisher in the graveyard erroneously, and it was his responsibility to correct that, and he didn't. And that was the reason for the DQ, as far as I understand it. But again, like, do we know whether or not he did it on purpose? We'll never know for sure. But this makes sure that if it was on purpose, he's not going to get away with it, right? And I'm not saying he did. I'm just saying that this makes sure that things are done right.
And this player is a good friend of mine who I travel to events with, Joseph Stacco. He got voted in through the wild card slots to get into the event. He and I shared an Airbnb together. Both of us got 3-ish hours of sleep. This is round 2 an event in a very complicated pod. I am still glad that he received a disqualification for the professional level rules enforcement level to ensure that something like this can't happen if somebody is doing that intentionally. It's the hard part with the rules at Pro REL. It doesn't matter what your intention is, and if it's a genuine mistake or you're doing it to gain an advantage, it doesn't matter because you can't read intention through the rules with something like that. And so I'm glad that the punishments were doled out, even though it affected a friend of mine and his ability.
Now, what do you think of the third DQ? Because that's an interesting one.
You know, the third DQ is from Isaac, our friend who won Countdown. Now, Isaac showed up as a mailman to the Invitational with a wonderful little satchel full of letters for all of the players in the Invitational to say, hey, welcome, I'm glad you're here. And in that was a poem, which was wonderful to read. And from a judge's perspective, something that I understand would give them pause. So Isaac wrote a letter to everybody with a sweet poem about it in reference to the sword that he won at Cowtown. And it was written in such a way that it could have been interpreted as an innuendo. And one of the judges in the second round of the event was made aware of the contents of the poem and ended up issuing a disqualification for him because it could have been interpreted and made somebody uncomfortable, which, you know, at Pro REL, this is something that maintains, and I think that's okay. A lot of us in the Invitational know each other. A lot of us in the Invitational know Isaac. Isaac is always a goofball. He wore a cow suit the entire time for Cowtown. Wore this mailman outfit all weekend. And me personally, I've loved getting that. It set a really good tone. People are in a great mood and happy to talk about it. But I think it's a good lesson to kind of show that we're attempting to take a tournament format seriously, and it's something that we can look into moving forward.
Yeah. And I'll just say this. You know, I had the opportunity to hang out with Isaac at LobbyCon, and I indeed handled his sword, and it was very impressive. It's very impressive.
Oh, what a man.
I still have that letter. I plan to frame it and hang it on my wall. That's how I feel about it.
I cherish it the same way I do the pin that we got for making the Invitational.
Exactly. And forever, Isaac will be a legend in the community for what he did. It sucks that he got DQ'd. I understand why they did it. I still don't agree with it, but I get it. The idea is to raise our level of function to a more pro level, and I think that's great.
I think also to ensure that the primary focus is on the competition at hand and not on something that could make somebody else uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. But
I think this is a situation where it was pretty clear that people were not uncomfortable with him doing this. But I'm glad that they're setting a precedent now that in the event somebody were to do something that would make somebody uncomfortable in the future, there's a precedent set that there's going to be punishments doled out for it.
Yeah, agreed. So there was one other controversy, and that was the Collusion game. This is a really interesting situation because...
That was my game.
Oh, were you in that game?
I was. So.
Oh, you tell the story then.
And this is where I'm going to throw up one of these for a second. And for those who know, they know. This is something you may see some players do in a tournament environment. I play Tameshi. I have a reputation for playing Tameshi. I understand it is not an enjoyable deck to play against, and it does a very good job at preventing you from being able to execute your combination win lines. Now, there is some sayings and some whisperings that it's better to make sure the stacks player doesn't win, even if that means that you don't. And there are some collusions that happen with players who may or may not have deals outside of the game, may or may not have interests in ensuring that one player wins versus another. And one of the things that had happened, I played a 3v1 the whole game, 2.5. It was me, BlueFarm, RogSi. And in the wise words of Ryan on CEDH, RogSi is my friend when I'm playing RogSi. They're handing each other Wishclaw talismans. They are showing each other their hands and making sure that they can help each other execute win lines and work together, not only to stop me from developing an advantage and winning the game, but to ensure that at least one of the two of them does. Now, from what I understand, After my huge punt with the grinding station situation, it goes around to Eric's turn. So it goes through BlueFarm, then to Ryan on RogSi. He just tutors and passes and gives the Wish Claw back to Eric. And then to Eric again. And one of the things that happen is Ryan goes for an instant speed win over Eric's win, determines he can't develop a line through it because of some interaction that's spent or anything like that. And then with Eric's Mnemonic Betrayal on the stack, casts Entomb and puts Thassa's Oracle into his own graveyard, so Eric's Mnemonic Betrayal gives him the win. Now, This is a situation that likely should not be happening, and at some levels of professional play. And when we're looking at the highest level of CEDH, ideally everybody's playing to win. It is a social game. There are going to be aspects to it, but currently in the rules of Magic, in the rules of CEDH, there is nothing to prevent collusion in helping another player win the game by taking legal game actions. You're allowed to put your win condition in the graveyard with somebody else's game-winning spell in the stack to ensure that they win. That is a legal thing you can do.
For now. That to me is the number one thing I think we see change after this tournament, is I think that there's going to be an immediate correction for that, because it's sort of like Pandora's box has been opened at this point. The fact that this is something that you can do means that there's incentives for people to work together and team to win events, and that's going to become a significant problem, I think, for CEDH, if not dealt with pretty quickly. Yep. My understanding is these guys, they play together all the time. Apparently, there was sort of a conversation that went on where Ryan attempted to win, and Sharky said, "I'll give you your shot. Go ahead. I won't stop you. But if I let you try now, you have to agree to let me try later." And that was kind of the agreement between them that led to this. But again, there's nothing illegal about it. This is completely within the bounds of the rules. And I'm a firm believer that as a tournament grinder, you should play all the way up to the edge of the rules at all times. You should not give up any advantages you can gain legally. Otherwise, you're setting yourself at a disadvantage for no reason. So I have no problem that they did this ethically, other than the fact that as a community, as a tournament scene, we have to come up with a correction quickly before this becomes a real problem.
And players will maximize their ability to gain an advantage in a tournament setting. I hate forcing draws. I want the game to conclude by playing the game of Magic and have a clear winner. It is advantageous for a tournament setting to force a draw when you're in a losing position. I have done it. All of us have done it. It is something that you are encouraged to do by the rules of the game and by the tournament format, even though it feels bad for other players, because that's how currently we're making top cuts. I think the draw problem has been something that's come up for a while now, especially when you have 3 players in a pod who want to draw and 1 who can't. Those 3 players will ensure that that pod will draw because that's what's most advantageous for them. We're going to see the same thing come up with Collusion. I think this is where my biggest frustration comes with people wanting to remove a point for draws as a solution. All you're doing is incentivizing players to pick who wins the game if they're not in a winning position. Right. Because if there's one player who's likely to make the top cut and they have a better record than the other 3 at the table, if I'm one of the players who I know I'm not winning this game, I'm going to do what I can to make sure that the player with the best record is going to win, because that's going to help my tiebreakers later.
Yep.
And that's going to happen. And you're going to see people sneak in 15-16 because they helped number 1 get his win in his match. And it's really going to matter. And so I think there's got to be a more elegant solution than just removing a point. But I could be wrong about that, and it might not be a problem. But I'm curious to see what that solution would look like.
Yeah, so I'll ask you for a hot take right on the spot. Put you on the spot right now. Is there any card that you would see banned in CEDH right now that could have an impact on the draw meta?
Well, I know the obvious answer is supposed to be Rhystic Study. Now, I have a little bit of push with it. I think Rhystic Study is a very powerful card that puts everybody else in check. If Rhystic Study is banned, the only thing keeping the turbo decks in check is Mystic Remora a lot of the time. You can have one stacked piece get deployed early, but all the turbo player is going to need is one way to remove the stacked piece and then win afterwards anyway. I think it's much harder to present a win through one of those draw engine effects early in the game. So turns 1, turn 2. If somebody gets their fish down on turn 1 and maybe has like a Chrome Mox with a blue spell imprinted underneath it, the turbo player going turn 1 Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual, Chrome Mox ad nauseum is much less likely to actually present their win because of it. So I think in practice, Rhystic Study leads to a lot of draws. I think we'll see a slant to even more turbo than we're seeing already if we get rid of cards like that right now. So I'm a little wary about throwing bans out at all. I'm not a dockside enjoyer. It's a necessary evil for the format as well. Blue decks will take over if dockside doesn't exist. You won't see creature-based decks basically at all. So I think we're in this really weird holding pattern where we've got people pointing guns at each other, and the first one to go off is going to start a chain reaction.
Yep, I think that's fair. I'm going to be asking everybody on the show this question because everyone's talking about the ban list right now and whether or not there needs to be a separate ban list for CDH now that the RC has basically said you're on your own. So everyone's having this conversation everywhere right now. I don't know where it leads or where we end up, but I think it's important to hear where people are coming from and what people's opinions are. You'll hear mine, I think, in a future episode. I think I'm going to take this on even deeper. But right now, I just want to get people's hot takes on it.
Totally.
So, who won the whole thing?
That would be Mr. Bailey himself.
Bailey Abner.
Bailey Abner.
Running one of the spiciest BlueFarm decks I've seen in a while. I encourage you guys to check it out. I'll put the link to it in the description of the video. Please check it out. He's running some spice. And I, for one, was very, very happy to see him take it down. This is a guy who, one of the most nice human beings to play with and be around in the CDH community. So to see him take it down, he really deserved it. He worked hard for this, and he's been grinding all year, and he's just just a good dude. So,
and this is coming off of his very near miss at top 16 at Cowtown. He got 17th on breakers, and so coming back to the Invitational and taking the whole thing down with your own BlueFarm deck, which in his words is full of his Cope favorite cards, and he's able to show, are they Cope or do they win events? I think the proof is there.
Yep. My money was on Sharky taking it down, so I was a little disappointed in Sharky. Come on, dude, you could do better than that. But still, he made top 4 of the hardest tournament I think to date ever. Yep. So kudos to him. Kudos to Ian for his amazing comeback run. Pretty damn impressive. And then NATO, Andy Beach rounding out the field, also on RogSi. So that was a hell of a pod. RogSi, BlueFarm, Kinnet. Yep. So a hell of a tournament, man.
Pod. And then Zane got very close to first after Swiss. I think Eric took over for him right at the last second. Again, in true Zane fashion, dominating the Swiss rounds and then not quite converting in the semifinals. But I think he's renamed his deck list affectionately to something to do with being 5th place.
Yeah, sounds right. And then the Open was also a pretty fierce tournament. I mean, there were a lot of killers in that tournament who didn't make the Invitational for whatever reason. We saw all kinds of craziness go down there, and the big winner was Brian Koval. And hopefully everyone knows who Brian Koval is at this point. One of my first experiences, Bosh and Roll. My very first experience in a CDH tournament was Oktoberfest back in 2022. That was the first time I met Bosh and Roll in person, where he proceeded to take down that tournament. And then he won again at Punt City 2. And then he didn't do anything for like 14 months. Like he won nothing. Didn't.
And let's be clear, he didn't win CDH events. He did take down large vintage and legacy events the rest of the year. Regularly.
But that's ho-hum for him. That's just normal weekend. For CDH, he had a bit of a rough 14-month little stretch there. But he came here with RogSi. And he, for those who know him, traditionally he's on BlueFarm. That's been his deck. He really kind of revolutionized that deck in a lot of ways, playing a more controlled variant rather than the turbo BlueFarm that was in play at that point in time. But he went with RogSi, and he went undefeated through the entire tournament. He lost no games.
0 losses and 3 draws. It's not even like he had 5 or 6 draws like we'll see from some of these undefeated runs. He won 6 games of CEDH. That's 7 runs of Swiss and a cut to top 16 and top 4. And he won 6 out of the possible, 9 rounds?
Yes.
That's insane. That is insane.
Yeah. And the final was also insane. So again, it was double RogSi, BlueFarm, and then Cephras Stacks, who deployed 2 rule of laws apparently throughout the game, and it ended up being a 4-hour slogfest that Brian finally took down, which is pretty wild.
Yeah. And the other RogSi player in the pod, Kevin Simmons, Varick, a friend of mine who I was able to beat in rock, paper, scissors to get into Punt City 3. Glad to see that he finally got his tournament showing on RogSi, and he ended up almost taking that game down. He had a demonic consultation to name Yawgmoth's Will with a Valley Flood color in play, and Yogg's Will was in the top 6 cards. And if it wasn't, he has it right there.
Yep. So congrats to, Kevin, congrats to Bosh and Roll, congrats to a lot of our friends who ended up top 16ing in that event. Let me pull some of these names up here. I want to call you guys out because I'm proud of y'all. I'm really proud of you guys. So we've got, Koval, we got Kevin, we got Nate, Big Nate, who was on Timnacrom. We had Hugo, who was on Tivit. We got Adatari, who was on RogSi. We got Joe Fago, who was on Nadu. We have Jordy, who Georgetown was on Timnacrom. We had Peter on Niv Mizzet. We had Aaron Lee. Like, all of these guys did an amazing job making it. Call out my friend Poncho Micah, who came in, just missed the cut at 22. Also did a great job. So very, very cool tournament. And a lot of good friends did well in it.
Oh, yeah. So I'm thrilled to see the growth of the format with this as well. I mean, seeing that TopDeck can sell out a 265 player event on top of the Invitational, where all 64 of us would have played in that open if the Invitational wasn't happening. And we're seeing that even despite your 64 hardest CEDH tournament grinders can't play in that event, it's still selling out, is wild for the growth of the format. And I think that's where a lot of my hesitancy comes with trying to shake things up with tournament structure and bans. We've got a good thing going. It's moving really well, and I'm hopeful that any changes that do eventually come are done to help continue to see that growth happen.
Yeah. So with that, we're moving into season 2 of the TopDeck Championship Series. Spoiler alert, my next guest is going to be Zane, talking about exactly that. So it should be an interesting conversation. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you guys will like and subscribe and follow along. Jason, it was a pleasure having you on here talking about this. It was a hell of a weekend that it's going to take me at least a couple weeks to recover from.
Absolutely.
I got to lick my wounds and come back stronger. So
totally. Thanks for having me. And I'm excited to see what Zane has to say about the future of the tournament circuit.
Yep. Onward and upward. I guess we're going to do 300-person events as the regular starting next year.
Great.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining, everybody.